Okay, let's just try to unpack this. Today is Tuesday, January 20, 2026. And I have to be honest with you, I am still feeling a serious case of whiplash. I think we all are.
Oh, definitely.
Because if you just look at the calendar, it has only been 17 days. 17. Since the world, or at least our corner of it, the Western Hemisphere, fundamentally snapped into a new reality. We are talking, of course, about January 3, 2026.
It's one of those dates, isn't it? You know how people talk about where they were when the Berlin Wall fell or on 9/11? Historians are already circling January 3rd in red ink.
They really are.
We're talking about Operation Absolute Resolve, or as some of the military insiders and the really nerdy defense blogs are calling the naval component, Operation Southern Spear.
Right. And the headline, which, and I do not use this phrase lightly, literally broke the internet, was this: a lightning military extraction. U.S. forces go in, and in what felt like the blink of an eye, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is no longer in Miraflores Palace. He is in federal custody in the Southern District of New York, facing narco-terrorism charges.
It was audacious. I mean, whether you think it was a stroke of genius or a flagrant violation of international law, you just have to admit the sheer scale of it.
Yeah.
Geopolitically, this is the most aggressive American foreign policy move since the invasion of Panama to get Noriega. That was 1989. You could even make the argument it rivals things from the height of the Cold War in terms of just boldness.
And that is exactly why we're doing this deep dive today.
Yeah.
Because the media noise right now, it is deafening.
It's impossible.
It's impossible to scroll through your feed without seeing one side screaming, "Heroic rescue, democracy is finally here," and the other side shouting, "Neo-imperialist overreach, this is a coup."
Yes.
This is a shouting match.
And as is usually the case, the truth isn't just somewhere in the middle. It's vastly more complicated and frankly a lot weirder than either of those bumper stickers.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to cut right through that partisan noise. We spent the last week, just combing through government documents, intelligence leaks, geopolitical analyses, sociological reports. We're going to really look at what they're calling the Maximum Pressure 2.0 plan.
Because this isn't just about a military raid, right? This isn't just, SEAL Team 6 kicks down a door.
Not at all.
This is about a whole new foreign policy doctrine. People are calling it the Dunroe Doctrine. It's about the psychology of a nation that's suffering from something the reports call political vertigo.
Right.
And spoiler alert, and this is the part that genuinely blew my mind, we're going to get into the reality of who is actually running Venezuela right now. Because I think most listeners, they probably assume it's the opposition leader, the Nobel Prize winner, but it's not.
No, it is not. And that specific detail, that little twist, is probably the most telling part of this entire operation. It tells us everything about what the U.S. actually wants versus what they say they want.
Okay.
But we have to start with the mechanics. What actually happened on the ground on the morning of January 3rd?
So let's look at the how. The sources we have describe a three-pronged approach spearheaded by the U.S. administration. The first prong is what they call direct decapitation, which sounds, medieval?
It's a very sterile military term for a very messy, very risky reality. This was the removal of the head of state and his immediate inner circle. The objective wasn't regime change in that traditional sense, toppling every statue and firing every general.
Right.
The goal was to surgically extract Maduro and the specific leadership nodes of what the U.S. Department of Justice calls the Cartel of the Suns.
Cartel of the Suns. It sounds like a bad Bond villain organization.
It does, but it's very real. Or at least the term is. It refers to the high-ranking generals in the Venezuelan military who wear these sun insignias on their uniforms.
Yeah.
The U.S. allegation for years has been that these generals were effectively running a massive drug trafficking ring from inside the state apparatus.
Okay.
So direct decapitation was about grabbing them, putting them on a plane to New York.
So you cut off the head, but then you have the second prong, which is resource recoupment. And this is the part that makes people incredibly cynical.
Of course.
It's a plan for U.S. firms to step in and rehabilitate the Orinoco oil belt. The stated goal, the PR line, is to use that revenue to repay defaulted debts and recover stolen assets.
Right, and we are going to have a very serious conversation about the feasibility of that later, because there's a lot of magical thinking happening in Washington about that oil. But the third prong is the one that has the geopolitical analysts really sweating. It's the quarantine doctrine.
Yeah, explain this, because quarantine sounds like a medical term. It makes me think we're back in 2020, but we're talking about battleships.
We are talking about a total military blockade of Venezuelan waters. The U.S. Navy has effectively drawn a line in the Caribbean Sea. The official reason is to prevent interference during this transition period.
Interference from who?
Specifically, they want to stop Iranian, Russian, or Chinese assets from entering or, and this might be more important, from leaving with sensitive data or, pallets of gold.
So it's a message.
It's a huge message to the world that says this is a closed theater, no entry. The Caribbean is closed for business unless we say so.
And this leads us directly to that term I mentioned earlier, the Don Roe Doctrine. I do love a good portmanteau, but this one feels heavy. What does it actually mean?
It's a play on the Monroe Doctrine, right?
Yeah.
From 1823. Back then, President Monroe basically told Europe, stay out of the Americas. This is our backyard. Analysts in 2026 are calling this the Don Roe Doctrine because it's a revival of that idea, but on steroids and updated for the digital age. It's a signal that the United States views the Western Hemisphere as its exclusive sphere of influence, period.
So it's a direct pushback against the multipolar world that everyone has been talking about for the last decade. I mean, we've been hearing about the decline of American hegemony forever.
Precisely. For years, the whole narrative has been about BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, building this alternative power structure. They were making massive inroads in Latin America. China buying mines in Peru, Russia selling weapons to Venezuela, Iran setting up refineries.
Right.
This operation is the U.S. slamming its hand on the table and saying, not here, not anymore.
Right.
It's a direct challenge to those multipolar ambitions. It's the empire striking back, if you want to use that analogy.
It really feels like a movie, honestly. The capture itself was broadcast in high definition. It was all over social media. I think I saw a clip of it on TikTok before I even saw it on the news.
That wasn't an accident. That is the pop culture element of 21st century warfare.
Sure.
Just like the Panama invasion was the first live TV war, in some ways this was the first streaming war. It echoes 1989, but it's updated for the digital age.
Yeah.
Geopolitical conflict is now a real-time event that you consume on your phone.
Yeah.
They wanted the world to see the perp walk. It was a demonstration of power.
But the U.S. government can't just come out and say, we did this because we wanted to show who's boss. That's not going to fly at the UN.
Right.
What is the official justification? What is the narrative they're selling to the world?
The official narrative is what they're calling a security surgical strike.
Yeah.
The argument is that Venezuela, under Maduro, had ceased to be a sovereign state and had become essentially a criminal enterprise.
Okay.
And they're focusing specifically on the flow of drugs and the influence of the Tren de Aragua gang.
Which, to be fair, isn't just a local gang anymore. They had been designated a foreign terrorist organization. We've seen headlines about them in Chicago, New York, Miami.
Correct. And the Tren de Aragua had been expanding its footprint onto U.S. soil. So the justification wasn't, we don't like his socialist politics. It was, this is a direct national security threat involving narco-terrorism. They framed it as targeting the nexus between the gang and the state.
So stopping the drugs, stopping the gangs, that's the why on the surface. But I always wonder, how did it get this bad? I mean, Venezuela used to be the wealthiest country in South America.
It was.
People used to move to Venezuela for jobs. Was this collapse inevitable?
That is the million-dollar question. And if you want to understand January 2026, you can't just look at last month. You have to look back at the last 100 years.
100 years? Wow, that seems like a stretch.
Truly. To really get this, we have to go back to a specific morning in December 1922. The shores of Lake Maracaibo. A company, Shell Oil, is drilling a well called Barroso II.
And they hit something big, I'm guessing.
Big is an understatement. They hit a reservoir so pressurized that the oil shot 200 feet into the air. It rained black rain on the village of Caibimos for 9 straight days.
9 days.
9 days. You could see the plume from miles away. It was terrifying and miraculous all at the same time.
And that's the moment the country changed forever.
Everything changed. Before that, Venezuela was an agricultural society.
Yeah.
Coffee, cocoa. After that week in 1922, it became a petrostate.
Okay.
And crucially, it became our petrostate. American companies swacked in. We built the towns. We basically wrote their petroleum laws. For the next 50 years, the Venezuelan economy was essentially an appendage of the U.S. energy grid.
So it was viewed as a pro-U.S. gas station.
That's the perfect term for it. A reliable gas station right in our neighborhood.
So when Maduro used to talk about Yankee imperialism, he wasn't just making it up for propaganda. He was tapping into a very real memory.
He was tapping into a century of resentment, absolutely. But the real pivot point, the moment the gas station decided to go rogue, was 1998.
Hugo Chavez wins the election.
Right, the Bolivarian Revolution. And this ended what they called the Punto Fijo era of stability. Chavez introduced something called petrodiplomacy. He realized that if the price of oil was high enough, he didn't really need the U.S.
Okay.
He used that oil wealth not just for social programs at home, but to build alliances with U.S. adversaries, Russia, Iran, Cuba.
Right, I remember Petrocarib.
Exactly. He created Petrocarib in 2005 to essentially buy loyalty from Caribbean nations with cheap oil.
So Venezuela went from being a reliable gas station for the U.S. to being a geopolitical thorn in its side, funded by the very resource the U.S. helped develop.
You've nailed it. And the tension just kept ratcheting up from there. We entered the maximum pressure era in 2019 when the U.S. recognized Juan Guaido as the interim president.
I remember that vividly. I really felt like the government was going to fall any minute back then. You had the concert on the bridge, the humanitarian aid trucks, but it just kind of fizzled out.
It didn't just fizzle, it calcified.
Yeah.
And that failure, that experience, is actually key to understanding why Operation Absolute Resolve happened now.
How so?
The Guaido experiment created a virtual government. We pretended he was president, but Maduro still held all the guns in the checkbook. It made the U.S. look weak, ineffective. Then, fast forward to 2023. We had the Barbados Agreement.
This was the carrot approach, right? Diplomacy, let's make a deal.
Yes.
Yeah.
The U.S. offered massive sanctions relief, specifically General License 44, which let Venezuela sell oil and gas freely again in exchange for a promise of fair elections. And it was a spectacular failure.
A total failure.
The regime released a few prisoners, took the money, pumped the oil, and then immediately banned the actual opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, from running.
So the lesson for U.S. policymakers was, we tried being nice, we tried diplomacy, we tried bribery effectively, and they took the cash and laughed in our faces.
That's exactly it. The collapse of the Barbados Agreement proved to the hawks in Washington that diplomacy without the credible threat of force just wasn't working. Then came the disputed 2024 election. Edmundo Gonzalez was recognized by the West as the winner. The exit polls showed a landslide.
But Maduro just stayed put, claimed victory, and cracked down.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the immediate precursors, late 2025.
The blockade light, as some people were calling it.
Okay.
The U.S. started seizing shadow fleet tankers, these ghost ships, moving sanctioned oil to China. They started designating gangs as terrorists. They were tightening the noose, setting the stage for the direct intervention we just saw.
Okay, so that's the setup. The context makes sense. We have a century of entanglement and a decade of failed diplomacy. But now let's talk about the situation on the ground today, because this is where the story takes a turn that I honestly did not see coming.
It is the twist that most people are missing because they're so focused on the Maduro captured headlines.
Right. So Maduro is in a cell in New York. You would assume, logically, that the opposition leader, the woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2025, Maria Corina Machado, is in the presidential palace. She's the hero of this story, right?
You would absolutely think so, but she is not.
Who is?
Delcy Rodriguez.
Hang on, wait. Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's vice president.
The woman who has been the face of the regime alongside him for years, the one on every sanctions list.
The very same. While Maduro was being flown north in handcuffs, the Venezuelan Supreme Court, which you have to remember is still filled with regime loyalists, swore in Delcy Rodriguez as acting president. And here is the kicker.
What?
The U.S. is negotiating with her.
That sounds insane. You're telling me the U.S. Marines stormed the palace, dragged Maduro out, and then the U.S. State Department turns around and shakes hands with his number two.
It sounds like a betrayal, doesn't it?
It sounds like a massive betrayal. If I'm a Venezuelan who marched in the streets for Maria Corina Machado, risked my life, and I see Delcy Rodriguez, the architect of the surveillance state, sitting in the president's chair with an American blessing, I'm not thinking liberation. I'm thinking deal with the devil.
And that is exactly the friction point. But you have to look at the alternative the Pentagon was facing. This highlights a massive shift in U.S. strategy. We are moving from democracy promotion to a new doctrine of stability over legitimacy.
Stability over legitimacy. The U.S. realized that if they just dismantled the entire government, overnight, fired the cabinet, dissolved the court, purged the military, you'd have chaos. You'd have Iraq in 2003. You'd have Somalia in the Caribbean.
So they kept the deep state to keep the lights on.
Exactly. They decapitated the top leader, but they're dealing with the lieutenants to maintain order.
Yeah.
They need someone to answer the phone when the looting starts.
So it's pragmatic.
Yeah.
Ruthlessly, cynically pragmatic.
It is. They are prioritizing a stable transition and, let's be honest, access to that oil over immediately handing power to the Democratic opposition.
And where does that leave Maria Corina Machado? I mean, she's the face of the freedom movement. She won the Nobel Prize.
It puts her in a very bizarre, very symbolic position. There was that strange cultural moment just last week where she presented her 2025 Nobel Peace Prize to the U.S. president.
I saw the photos. It looked awkward.
It was incredibly divisive. The human rights community was split right down the middle. Some saw it as a gesture of gratitude, thank you for removing the dictator. But others saw it as a really problematic alignment. A Nobel Peace Laureate effectively endorsing a military intervention, endorsing a coup, technically.
Wow.
It creates a very complicated legacy for her.
And it suggests that even though the bad guy is gone, the good guys aren't necessarily in charge yet.
Which brings us to the other big promise of this operation, the oil. Resource recoupment.
Right.
The narrative is that U.S. firms are going to swoop in, turn the taps back on, and use the money to rebuild the country.
That is the narrative. But if you talk to energy experts, engineers, the people who actually know how this stuff works, they call it the oil myth.
Why is it a myth?
Yeah.
Venezuela has the largest proven reserves in the world. The oil is there. We know it's there.
The oil is there, underground. But getting it out, that's a nightmare. And it's not just about rust. It's about chemistry.
Chemistry? What do you mean chemistry?
Yes. Most of Venezuela's crude, specifically from the Orinoco Belt, is extra heavy. It's essentially tar. It has the consistency of peanut butter.
Okay.
You can't just pump it into a ship and sail away. It doesn't flow. So how do you move it?
You have to mix it with lighter fuels, which are known as diluents, mostly a chemical called naphtha. It thins the tar enough to pump it. But here's the catch. Because of sanctions and years of mismanagement, Venezuela stopped producing enough of its own diluents years ago.
So they were importing them.
They were importing them,
Yeah.
primarily from Iran.
And the U.S. Navy just put a blockade up.
Bingo. The quarantine actively sabotages the resource recoupment. No Iranian tankers means no Iranian diluents.
So the blockade is stopping the very thing they need to make the oil profitable.
Exactly. You have U.S. engineers arriving at facilities where the upgraders, these massive plants needed to process this tar, have been stripped for copper wire by starving workers. And even if they can fix the machines, they don't have the chemical ingredients to move the product because the Navy is blocking the port.
So you can't just flip a switch.
You absolutely cannot. The best estimates suggest it would take between $50 and $100 billion in investment.
$100 billion.
And nearly a decade just to return to 1990s production levels.
10 years.
Yes. So this idea that oil money is going to instantly flow into the streets of Caracas next week and fix the economy, it's a fantasy.
Right.
And in the meantime, sanctions remain largely in place during this transition.
Yeah.
Because Delcy is still technically in charge.
Which means for the average Venezuelan, the economic stagnation hasn't ended. The headlines have changed, but the grocery store hasn't.
Exactly. The liberated population is still facing the same empty shelves and worthless currency today that they were facing a month ago.
That is heavy. And it leads us perfectly into the psychological impact of all this, because we talk about strategies and oil barrels and chemical diluents, but there are millions of people living through this. The sources mention a term, political vertigo. Can we break that down? Because it sounds like a dizziness.
It is a dizziness, but a societal one. Think about it on a street level. For 20 years, your survival depended on a Consejo Comunal, the neighborhood council run by the Socialist Party.
Right.
They decided if you got a food box, the CLIP box,
Hey.
that month. They decided if you got medicine. They decided if you got a job.
That's your entire safety net. The party is the state.
Right. Now imagine you wake up Tuesday morning. Maduro's gone. The party office is empty. The door is flapping in the wind. The Colectivo guys on motorcycles who used to patrol the neighborhood have vanished or changed their clothes. Do you get a food box today? If you call the police because someone is robbing your store, are they coming? Or are they hiding because they think they're next on the extraction list?
It's like gravity just turned off.
That is political vertigo. It's not just who is president. It's the terrifying realization that there is no longer a mechanism for your daily survival. The monster is dead, but the monster was also the one feeding you.
Wow.
The sources call it the decapitation effect. You remove the head, but the body is still thrashing around.
And this creates a state of anomie, a breakdown of social norms.
Yes, and you combine that with learned helplessness. After years of hyperinflation and dependency, the population struggles to pivot to self-governance. You don't just switch on a democracy after years of trauma. You don't just suddenly become a civic-minded society when you've been fighting for scraps for a decade.
And we have to talk about the diaspora. There are millions of Venezuelans in the US, in Colombia, in Spain. How does this affect them?
This is one of the cruelest twists of the entire operation. With the regime technically toppled, the legal justification for temporary protected status, or TPS, in the U.S. evaporates.
So the U.S. government says, hey, we fixed your country, we got the bad guy, you can go home now.
Exactly. Mission accomplished, pack your bags. But they're being told to return to a country that is effectively a hollow state, run by a military junta under Delcy Rodriguez, with no oil revenue and no safety net. It creates this psychological whiplash. Refugees are caught between the hope of return and the terror of what they're returning to.
It's creating a new layer of trauma on top of the old one.
It is.
And inside the country itself, the polarization must be intense.
Off the charts. The country is completely fractured. You have the hardcore Chavistas who see this as a foreign invasion and occupation. They're hiding weapons, planning an insurgency.
Okay.
And then you have the oppositors who see it as liberation. But even among the opposition, there is division. Some wanted a peaceful transition, not U.S. Marines walking through the streets of Caracas.
So we have a polarized populace, a provisional government that is actually just the old government minus the top guy, and an economic crisis that isn't going away anytime soon. Let's zoom out. What does this mean for the rest of the world? Because I imagine there are some people in Moscow and Beijing who are furious.
Furious is an understatement. They are apocalyptic about this. Critics, including reputable outlets like The Guardian and analysts in Brazil, are arguing that this represents the Putinization of U.S. policy.
Putinization, that is a very loaded term.
It is. But look at the argument.
Yeah.
The argument is that the superpower, in this case the U.S., is ignoring international law to enforce its will on a neighbor because of security concerns.
Yeah.
It's the idea that might makes...
Right.
Critics argue that by invading a sovereign nation to change its regime, the U.S. is doing exactly what it condemned Russia for doing in Ukraine.
It sets a precedent.
A very dangerous one. If the U.S. can use the security risk argument, drugs are killing our people, so we have to invade, what stops China from using a similar argument? What stops China from saying Taiwan is a security risk, or history demands this, and pointing to January 3rd as their justification?
Wow.
They can just say, we are doing what you did. You secured your backyard, we are securing ours.
And the global reaction reflects that split.
Completely. You have Latin American neighbors like Brazil, President Lula's government,
Yeah.
condemning it as aggression. They don't want U.S. military interventions in South America, period.
Yeah.
It brings back very bad memories of the 1960s and 70s for them.
Sure.
And obviously the BRICS nations, China, Russia, Iran, view this as a hybrid attack on their interest.
Because they had a lot of money and influence tied up in the Maduro regime.
Billions. Loans, infrastructure projects, military sales. And that quarantine we mentioned earlier is directly blocking them from protecting those investments. It's basically the U.S. seizing their assets by force.
What about the internal risk? We talked about the decapitation effect. Is there a risk that this doesn't lead to stability, but to something much worse?
That is the civil war risk. That is the nightmare scenario. The danger is that the Venezuelan military splits. Maybe some generals be loyal to the Rodriguez U.S. transition plan because they want amnesty. They want to keep their stolen money and retire in Miami.
Okay.
But others, maybe the ideological hardliners or the guys who know they're too dirty to ever get a deal, might fight back.
It could turn into a Libya situation.
That is the fear. The power vacuum argument suggests that removing the dictator might not bring democracy. It might just empower non-state armed groups. You can see warlordism, where different regions are controlled by different factions. The Andean states controlled by one general, the Amazon controlled by miners and gangs, the coast controlled by the Marines.
Which would be a humanitarian nightmare.
It would. And it would destabilize the entire region, likely causing more migration, not less, which is exactly what the U.S. says it wants to stop.
So bringing this all together, we are looking at a high-stakes gamble.
The highest stakes. The U.S. has bet everything on stability over legitimacy. They are betting that they can manage a transition by working with the old regime's number two, securing the oil eventually, and keeping their geopolitical rivals out.
But the narrative of restoring democracy feels a little thin at this point.
It conflicts directly with the reality of negotiating with Delcy Rodriguez. It forces us to ask, is this about freedom? Or is it about reasserting control over the hemisphere and its resources? Is it about the ballot box or the oil barrel?
It's a conflict between the story we tell ourselves, the city on a hill story, and the cold, hard facts of the operation.
Precisely.
So here we are in 2026. The dust has not settled. The black rain of 1922 has turned into the black berets of 2026. But what is the final thought you want to leave our listeners with? What is the question they should be asking as they watch the news tonight?
I think we need to look beyond Venezuela. Why does this matter to someone living in London or Tokyo or New York who doesn't really care about oil prices? It matters because it forces the world to ask a really fundamental question. Can democracy be delivered via an extraction team?
That is the question. Can you force-feed freedom at gunpoint?
We are in the mid-2020s. We thought the era of raw hemispheric power plays was over. We thought we were in a rules-based order where sovereignty mattered. This operation challenges all of that. The listener needs to reflect on whether the 21st century will be defined by the rule of law or by the return of spheres of influence. Can great powers enforce order without undermining the very order they claim to protect?
That is a thought that is going to stick with me. Can great powers enforce order without undermining the order they claim to protect?
Listeners, we want to know what you think. Is this a liberation, an occupation, or something entirely new?
It's likely all three at once.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. Stay curious, stay critical, and we'll see you in the next Up Dive.
Thank you.